August 11th, 1944. The sandy terrain near Oględów, southern Poland. Soviet tanker Dmitri Aleksandrovich peered through the narrow vision slit of his IS-2 heavy tank, watching dust clouds rise from the tree line 3 kilometers distant. Intelligence reports had warned them. The Germans were deploying their newest weapon, something the reconnaissance units called Königstiger, the King Tiger. The massive 70-ton monsters mounted an 88mm gun with a barrel so long it seemed to defy physics. German propaganda claimed these behemoths could destroy any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, picking off targets before enemy guns could even reach effective firing distance. Aleksandrovich had been fighting Germans since Kursk. He knew propaganda when he heard it, but he also knew the mathematics of armored combat, and those mathematics terrified him. His IS-2's powerful 122mm gun could destroy almost anything it hit, but hitting required getting close, within 800 meters or less against frontal armor. The King Tiger's gun could engage effectively at more than double that range. The approaching Germans held every tactical advantage: superior optics, superior range, superior armor. The Red Army commanders knew this, which was why Aleksandrovich's regiment had been positioned in prepared ambush positions rather than sent to meet the enemy in open combat. Sometimes survival matters more than glory. Sometimes living to fight another day represents the only rational tactical choice when facing an enemy whose technological advantages seem insurmountable. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The German Panzerkampfwagen Tiger OSV, officially designated SD-KFZ 182, represented the culmination of German heavy tank development during World War II. Development began even before the Tiger I had proved itself in combat, as Hitler demanded ever heavier armor and more powerful guns to maintain battlefield superiority. The King Tiger combined the Tiger I's thick armor with the sloped armor principles pioneered by the Panther medium tank, creating what German engineers believed was the ultimate heavy tank design. At nearly 70 tons combat weight, protected by 100 to 185 millimeters of frontal armor, and armed with the long-barreled 8.8 cm KBUK 43 liters, 71 gun, the King Tiger seemed invincible on paper. The gun represented a masterpiece of German ordnance engineering. At 6.24 meters long, the KUK-43's barrel extended more than 1.3 meters beyond the Tiger I's KUK-36 gun. This extra length, combined with a significantly larger propellant charge, generated muzzle velocities exceeding 1,130 meters per second with standard armor-piercing rounds. German test ranges demonstrated remarkable accuracy. During practice firing, King Tiger gunners achieved 100% first-round hit probability against a 2-meter by 2.5-meter target at 1,000 meters range. At 1,500 meters, hit probability remained between 95 and 97%, depending on ammunition type. Even at 2,000 meters, gunners could expect 85 to 87% first-round hits under ideal conditions. These weren't propaganda figures. These were verified test results from Kummersdorf proving grounds, witnessed by senior Wehrmacht officers and armaments officials. The penetration characteristics matched the accuracy. The standard Panzer Granit 39-43 armor-piercing shell could penetrate 202 millimeters of armor plate angled at 30 degrees from 100 meters distance. At 2,000 meters, penetration decreased to 132 millimeters, still sufficient to defeat the frontal armor of every Allied tank fielded in 1944, except the Soviet IS-2, and even the IS-2 could be penetrated through weaker points or at closer ranges. German tankers who had fought Soviet T-34 seconds and IS-2 seconds, American Shermans, and British Churchills understood these numbers represented overwhelming tactical superiority. A King Tiger positioned on open ground could engage and destroy enemy armor at ranges where return fire remained physically impossible. The mathematics were simple and brutal. If the King Tiger crew spotted you first at 2,000 meters, you died before your gun could reach effective range. The psychological effect on Allied tank crews proved devastating. American tankers who encountered King Tigers in Normandy and the Ardennes reported what medical officers termed tiger phobia, a reluctance to advance when intelligence suggested King Tigers operated in the area. British crews mounting 76.2mm guns in Sherman Fireflies could engage at longer ranges than standard Shermans, but even they preferred ambush tactics over direct confrontation. Soviet crews knew from captured intelligence documents and interrogations of German prisoners that their standard T-34-85 medium tank, mounting an 85mm gun, stood virtually no chance against King Tiger frontal armor even at close range. Only the IS-2 heavy tank, with its massive 122mm gun, could realistically engage King Tigers in direct combat, and even then only under specific tactical conditions that negated German range advantages. The Soviet Iosif Stalin II, universally known as the IS-2, emerged from a completely different design philosophy. Soviet tank designers had learned brutal lessons during the German invasion of 1941. Speed of production mattered more than technical perfection. Reliability under harsh conditions trumped theoretical performance. Overwhelming numerical superiority could offset individual vehicle inferiority. The IS-2 represented Soviet heavy tank development, responding to the appearance of German heavy tanks, particularly the Tiger I encountered in early 1943. Soviet engineers evaluated two candidate weapons for the new heavy tank: the D-10 100mm gun, derived from naval anti-aircraft weapons, and the D-25 122mm gun, adapted from the A-19 core artillery piece. The D-10 offered superior penetration against armor plate and a higher rate of fire, features that would have made it an excellent anti-tank weapon. Soviet High Command rejected it anyway. The 122mm gun, despite slower rate of fire and more cumbersome two-piece ammunition, provided devastating high-explosive capability against fortifications, infantry positions, and soft targets. Soviet doctrine emphasized breakthrough operations, assaulting fortified positions and urban areas where high-explosive firepower mattered more than optimized anti-tank performance. The IS-2 was designed to smash through German defensive lines, destroying bunkers and anti-tank positions, clearing paths for T-34 medium tanks and infantry to exploit. Tank versus tank combat, while important, represented only one mission among many. The D-25 tons gun, as the tank-mounted variant was designated, fired a two-piece round consisting of a projectile loaded separately from the propellant charge. This cumbersome loading process limited rate of fire to between 2 and 3 rounds per minute with a well-trained crew. By comparison, German guns using single-piece ammunition could manage 5 or 6 rounds per minute, and American tanks achieved even higher rates. The IS-2 carried only 28 rounds of 122mm ammunition, severely limiting sustained combat capability compared to tanks carrying 50 or 60 rounds. But when that 122mm shell hit its target, the results were catastrophic. The standard BR-471 armor-piercing high-explosive round weighed 25 kilograms and contained 246 grams of TNT explosive filler. Soviet testing at Kubinka, proving grounds in late 1943, demonstrated that the D-25 tons could penetrate the frontal armor of a captured Panther tank at 1,500 meters range, driving completely through the tank from front glacis to rear plate. Against Tiger I tanks, the 122mm gun could penetrate turret armor from 1,000 to 1,500 meters and could crack welds or penetrate edges of front hull plates from 500 to 600 meters. These test results gave Soviet commanders confidence that the IS-2 could engage German heavy tanks effectively. But the testing also revealed critical limitations. Accuracy represented the IS-2's most significant weakness compared to German designs. The D-25 tons gun, adapted from a field artillery piece rather than designed specifically as a tank gun, exhibited significantly greater dispersion than German tank guns. At 1,000 meters range, 50% of rounds would fall within a zone approximately 30 centimeters wide and 50 centimeters high. This compared unfavorably to German guns achieving tighter groupings. At 2,000 meters, the dispersion increased dramatically, though some Soviet sources claimed 100% accuracy against standard test targets at this range under ideal conditions. However, ideal conditions meant known range, stationary target, prepared firing position, and experienced gunner. Combat conditions rarely proved ideal. The IS-2's optics, while adequate, lacked the precision of German Zeiss optics. The turret traverse mechanism, powered by hand cranks rather than hydraulic systems in most German tanks, made tracking moving targets laborious. The commander lacked a proper cupola on early production models, limiting battlefield awareness. Most critically, the enormous muzzle blast and recoil from the 122mm gun made rapid target re-engagement difficult. After firing, the crew needed several seconds to identify whether they had hit, then another 10 to 15 seconds to reload, then additional time to re-aim if the first shot missed. By the time they fired a second round, a German Königstiger crew could have fired 3 or 4 rounds back. The tactical implications were clear. The IS-2 could not win long-range gunnery duels against Königsteigers. German optical superiority, better accuracy, higher rate of fire, and ability to penetrate IS-2 armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters meant that any engagement fought at German-preferred ranges would end with destroyed Soviet tanks. Soviet commanders understood this perfectly. Intelligence summaries distributed to IS-2 regiments in mid-1944 explicitly warned crews never to engage Königsteigers at ranges exceeding 800 meters. Closer was better. 500 meters or less ideal, ambush positions mandatory, tactical surprise essential. The mathematics were unforgiving. At 2,000 meters, the Königstiger enjoyed overwhelming advantages. At 500 meters, the playing field leveled. At 200 meters, the IS-2's massive 122mm shell could penetrate virtually anywhere on the Königstiger's hull or turret, while German return fire, though still deadly, required more precise shot placement. Soviet doctrine adapted accordingly. IS-2 regiments deployed in prepared defensive positions, using terrain to mask their presence until German tanks closed to effective range. They coordinated with infantry anti-tank teams carrying PTRD anti-tank rifles and RPG-43 anti-tank grenades to engage German armor from multiple directions simultaneously. They accepted that individual IS-2 tanks might be sacrificed to create opportunities for others to fire from, advantageous positions. This represented Soviet armored warfare doctrine distilled to its essence. Accept casualties. Leverage numerical superiority. Force the enemy to fight at ranges where Soviet weapons remained effective. Never fight the enemy's preferred battle. Always force the enemy to fight your battle instead. The first combat encounter between Königsteigers and IS-2 seconds occurred in August 1944 near the town of Sandomierz in southern Poland, part of the Vistula-Oder offensive that would eventually carry Soviet forces to Berlin. The German 16th Panzer Division, reinforced by elements of the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion equipped with 11 Königsteigers, launched a counterattack against Soviet positions. The objective was to recapture Oględów and relieve pressure on German forces withdrawing across Poland. Soviet intelligence had warned that Königsteigers were operating in the sector. The 53rd Guards Tank Brigade, reinforced by the 71st Independent Guards Heavy Tank Regiment, equipped with IS-2 tanks, deployed into prepared ambush positions along likely German avenues of approach. The extremely sandy terrain forced German armor to remain on roads where possible, channeling their advance into predictable corridors. Soviet forces positioned tanks and self-propelled guns in concealed positions, with clear fields of fire across these approach routes. When the Königsteigers advanced on the morning of August 11th, Soviet tankers held fire until the range closed to 800 meters. The lead German tank, advancing down the main road toward Oględów, presented a perfect target. 3 IS-2 tanks fired nearly simultaneously. One round struck the Königstiger's turret front, 2 others hit the hull. the massive German tank shuddered, stopped, and began burning. German crews reported later that the sheer violence of the 122mm impacts exceeded anything they had experienced, even from Allied artillery. The second King Tiger in column attempted to reverse, exposing its thinner side armour. Another IS-2 round penetrated the hull, killing the crew instantly. A third King Tiger took a hit on its right side from an ISU-122 self-propelled gun that had manoeuvred to a flanking position. Within minutes of the engagement starting, 3 King Tigers sat destroyed or burning on the road, blocking the advance of vehicles behind them. The battle continued throughout the day as German forces attempted to manoeuvre around the ambush. A fourth King Tiger was knocked out later in the afternoon by a T-34 76 medium tank that somehow closed to within 400 meters without being detected. By evening, when German forces withdrew, 4 King Tigers had been destroyed outright and 10 others damaged or abandoned. Soviet forces captured 3 operational King Tigers, along with complete documentation including technical manuals and maintenance logs. These captured vehicles were immediately transported to Kubinka, proving grounds for comprehensive testing. The cost to Soviet forces, while significant, remained manageable within Soviet operational doctrine. 3 IS-2 tanks destroyed, 7 damaged but repairable. Unknown numbers of T-34 medium tanks and other armoured vehicles lost. Infantry casualties substantial but not crippling. Most importantly, the mission succeeded. The German counterattack failed. Soviet positions held. The King Tigers, despite their technological superiority, had not achieved the battlefield dominance German propaganda promised. This engagement at Oględów provided critical intelligence about King Tiger weaknesses that would inform Soviet tactics for the remainder of the war. First, the extremely sandy terrain had forced German tanks onto predictable routes, negating their mobility advantage and making ambush tactics effective. Second, when forced to fight at close ranges in cluttered terrain, the King Tiger's long gun barrel proved unwieldy, limiting its ability to track fast-moving targets. Third, the tank's enormous weight created mobility problems in difficult terrain, restricting tactical flexibility. Fourth, mechanical reliability remained questionable, with several King Tigers abandoned due to breakdowns rather than combat damage. Most critically, Soviet tankers learned that the King Tiger could be killed. Its armour, though formidable, could be penetrated by the IS-2's 122mm gun at practical combat ranges. Its crew, though well-trained, remained vulnerable to the psychological shock of massive high-explosive shells detonating against their tank's armour, even when penetration didn't occur. The myth of invincibility shattered. The subsequent Soviet testing of captured King Tigers at Kubinka confirmed what the battlefield engagement suggested. The 8.8cm KK-43 gun demonstrated excellent accuracy and penetration, matching German claims. The armour protection proved formidable against most anti-tank weapons. The optical systems and fire control equipment represented the finest German engineering could produce. But the tank consumed fuel at alarming rates, managing only 120 kilometers on paved roads under ideal conditions. The Maybach HL 230 engine, already overtaxed powering 60-ton Panthers, struggled under the King Tiger's 70-ton weight. The transmission, prone to failures even in German testing, broke repeatedly during Soviet trials. Most damningly, cooling systems proved inadequate for hot weather operations. When Soviet engineers conducted sustained running tests in summer conditions, engines overheated and seized within hours. The King Tiger represented a weapon system optimized for specific tactical conditions, defensive operations from prepared positions, in moderate climate, with excellent logistical support, against enemies forced to attack across open ground. Under these narrow circumstances, the tank proved devastating. Outside these circumstances, its effectiveness decreased dramatically. The broader strategic context reveals why the King Tiger's tactical superiority failed to translate into strategic significance. Germany produced exactly 492 King Tigers between 1943 and 1945. The Soviet Union produced 3,854 IS-2 tanks during the same period. This production disparity, nearly 8-1 in Soviet favor, meant that even if every King Tiger destroyed 5 IS-2 tanks before being knocked out, the Soviets would still have overwhelming numerical superiority, and the actual combat exchange ratios never approached 5-1. The mathematics of industrial warfare proved more decisive than the mathematics of ballistic performance. A tank that exists on the battlefield, regardless of technical specifications, matters infinitely more than a superior tank that was never built. Soviet factories east of the Ural Mountains, relocated there in 1941 during the desperate days of the German invasion, operated around the clock, producing tanks, artillery, and ammunition. American Lend-Lease supplies provided raw materials, machine tools, and entire factories. The Soviet system, though crude by German standards, achieved something German industry could not match by 1944: sustained mass production under conditions of total war. German industry, subjected to increasingly heavy Allied strategic bombing, struggled to maintain production of any complex weapons system. The Henschel plant that produced King Tiger hulls and turrets suffered catastrophic damage during 5 separate bombing raids between September 22 and October 7, 1944. These raids destroyed 95% of the factory's floor space, causing estimated loss of 657 King Tigers that were never built. Each King Tiger cost 321,500 Reichsmarks to produce, making it the most expensive German tank of the war. For the same resources, Germany could have produced approximately 3 Panther medium tanks or 5 Panzer IV medium tanks. Senior German officers debated whether concentrating resources on a small number of ultra-heavy tanks made strategic sense when the Wehrmacht desperately needed replacements for the thousands of medium tanks being destroyed on the eastern and western fronts. The debate proved academic. Hitler personally insisted on King Tiger production, believing that technical superiority could offset numerical inferiority. He was wrong. By late 1944, the question facing German commanders wasn't whether King Tigers could destroy Allied tanks at 2,000 meters range. The question was whether enough King Tigers could reach the battlefield, with adequate fuel and ammunition, to influence the battle's outcome before being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The answer, increasingly, was no. The Battle of Berlin in April and May 1945 demonstrated both the King Tiger's capabilities and its ultimate irrelevance to the war's outcome. Elements of the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, equipped with King Tigers, fought desperate defensive actions during the Soviet assault on the German capital. German tank crews achieved remarkable tactical successes, destroying Soviet tanks at long range and holding key positions despite overwhelming enemy superiority. One King Tiger, commanded by a gunner named Bachmann, reportedly destroyed 12 Soviet tanks in a single engagement near the Silo Heights, before withdrawing when ammunition ran low. These individual achievements, though impressive, changed nothing. The Red Army deployed over 6,000 tanks and self-propelled guns for the Berlin operation, supported by overwhelming artillery and air superiority. Soviet commanders accepted that some attacks would be defeated, some units would suffer heavy casualties, and some positions would require multiple assaults to capture. This represented Soviet operational doctrine functioning as intended. Losses were expected, anticipated, and planned for. Reserve units stood ready to replace depleted formations. Ammunition supplies remained adequate despite heavy consumption. The industrial base continued producing replacement vehicles faster than they could be destroyed. Germany possessed none of these advantages by April 1945. Every King Tiger lost represented an irreplaceable asset. Every experienced crew killed meant replacements would be hastily trained conscripts. Every litre of fuel consumed meant less remained for subsequent operations. The tactical superiority of individual King Tigers mattered less with each passing day, as German strategic position deteriorated beyond recovery. When the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion finally ceased operations on May 2, 1945, following the German capitulation in Berlin, the unit possessed exactly 7 operational King Tigers. The remainder had been destroyed in combat, abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel exhaustion, or deliberately destroyed by their crews to prevent capture. The battalion's war diary, recovered by Soviet forces, documented the frustrating reality of operating technically superior equipment under conditions of strategic collapse. Excellent tanks rendered immobile by lack of fuel, powerful guns without ammunition, skilled crews without infantry support. Technical superiority without strategic viability equals tactical irrelevance. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Soviet perspective on the King Tiger evolved significantly between August 1944 and May 1945. Initial encounters produced genuine concern among Soviet commanders, who recognized that the German heavy tank possessed capabilities exceeding any previous German design. Intelligence summaries distributed in late 1944 emphasized King Tiger threats and recommended specific tactical countermeasures. But by early 1945, Soviet attitudes had shifted from concern to professional respect tempered by understanding of German limitations. Captured King Tigers at Kubinka underwent exhaustive testing that revealed every weakness. Interrogations of German prisoners provided detailed information about fuel consumption, mechanical reliability problems, and maintenance requirements. Battlefield intelligence documented King Tiger deployment patterns, typical tactical employment, and vulnerability to specific weapons. Most importantly, frontline units accumulated combat experience engaging King Tigers under various conditions. The myth of invincibility dissolved entirely. Soviet tankers learned that King Tigers, like all tanks, possessed vulnerable points. The lower front hull, though heavily armoured, could be penetrated by 122mm rounds at moderate ranges. The turret sides, significantly thinner than frontal armour, presented targets when the tank rotated its turret. The rear armour, designed to defeat only small arms and shell fragments, could be penetrated by any anti-tank weapon. The tracks and running gear, exposed and vulnerable, could be damaged by artillery fire or infantry anti-tank weapons, immobilizing the tank and rendering it a stationary pillbox rather than a mobile weapon system. Soviet tactical doctrine incorporated these lessons systematically. IS-2 regiments received specific training on engaging King Tigers, emphasizing ambush tactics, close-range engagement, and coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Infantry anti-tank teams trained to approach immobilized King Tigers and attack vision ports, engine hatches, and other weak points. Artillery units learned to concentrate fire on areas where King Tiger operated, creating craters and obstacles that restricted German movement and forced tanks into predictable routes where ambushes could be prepared. Air support, increasingly available as Soviet air superiority became absolute, targeted King Tigers with rockets and bombs when identified. The operational employment of King Tigers by the Wehrmacht revealed fundamental misunderstanding of the tank's actual capabilities versus its theoretical performance. German doctrine envisioned King Tigers deployed in independent heavy tank battalions, 45 tanks at full strength, operating as mobile reserves rushing to threatened sectors. The tanks would deploy into prepared defensive positions, engage attacking Allied armour at maximum range, destroy enemy tanks before they could close to effective firing distance, then withdraw before being outflanked and relocate to the next threatened sector. This operational concept made sense on paper. In practice, it rarely worked as planned. The King Tiger's poor fuel economy, approximately 120 miles per tank of fuel under ideal road conditions, but only 50 to 60 miles under combat conditions, severely limited operational mobility. Moving a King Tiger battalion from one sector to another consumed enormous fuel quantities that German logistics increasingly struggled to provide. The tank's weight created transport problems. Most bridges in Eastern Europe couldn't support 70-ton vehicles, forcing King Tigers to search for river fording sites or heavy-duty bridges, adding hours to movement times. The tank's mechanical complexity meant that extended road marches resulted in breakdowns requiring time-consuming repairs. By the time King Tiger battalions reached threatened sectors, battles often concluded without them. German commanders learned to position King Tigers in static defensive positions where their firepower could be maximized and their mobility limitations minimized. This represented sound tactics given available equipment, but it also meant abandoning the mobile warfare doctrine that had made the Wehrmacht so effective in earlier war years. Static defense invited enemy artillery bombardment, air attack, and systematic reduction by forces with unlimited time to prepare assaults. The King Tiger, designed as a breakthrough tank to lead offensive operations, spent most of its combat career fighting defensive actions from prepared positions. Offensive operations like the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 demonstrated King Tiger limitations in attack. The narrow, icy roads through the Ardennes forest channeled German armor onto predictable routes. American forces, though initially surprised and overwhelmed, quickly adapted by destroying bridges and blocking roads, forcing German tanks, including King Tigers, to halt, while engineers cleared obstacles or found alternate routes. Fuel shortages, already critical when the offensive began, became catastrophic as supply convoys failed to reach forward units. Many King Tigers were abandoned by their crews not because of combat damage, but because they ran out of fuel and no means existed to refuel them. The offensive failed decisively, and substantial numbers of Germany's best tanks were lost for no strategic gain. The comparison between King Tiger and IS-2 operational availability rates tells the story of two different approaches to armoured warfare. By March 1945, German records indicate that 59% of King Tigers remained operational, actually matching or exceeding the operational rates of other German tanks like the Panther at 48%. This challenged the common perception that King Tigers suffered from crippling reliability problems. Given adequate maintenance, spare parts, and skilled mechanics, the King Tiger could be kept operational at acceptable rates. But adequate maintenance, spare parts, and skilled mechanics described resources Germany no longer possessed by early 1945. Soviet IS-2 tanks, by contrast, were designed from the beginning assuming maintenance would be performed by minimally trained mechanics using basic tools under field conditions. The drivetrain used robust components with large tolerances, sacrificing precision for reliability. The engine, a proven V2 diesel design already produced in huge quantities for T-34 medium tanks, could be swapped entirely in field conditions if repairs proved too time-consuming. The tracks used simple pins rather than complex connectors, enabling quick repairs with improvised tools. Most importantly, spare parts remained available in quantity. Soviet logistics prioritized parts supply, knowing that keeping existing tanks operational mattered as much as building new ones. German logistics, collapsing under the strain of Allied bombing and Soviet advances, increasingly failed to provide necessary spare parts. Tanks sat disabled, waiting for replacement transmissions that never arrived, or engines that couldn't be transported, or specialized tools that no longer existed. The theoretical superiority of German engineering became irrelevant when that engineering required industrial infrastructure that no longer functioned. The human cost of the King Tiger program warrants examination. Each King Tiger required approximately 300,000 man-hours to produce, drawing skilled workers from other essential war production. The specialized steel alloys used in King Tiger armor required rare metals in increasingly short supply. The complex optical systems required precision manufacturing capacity desperately needed for other weapons. Every resource devoted to King Tiger production represented resources unavailable for producing the trucks, anti-tank guns, aircraft, and ammunition that might have been more valuable to German war efforts. Senior German officers recognized this problem. General Heinz Guderian, Inspector General of Panzer Troops, repeatedly argued that Germany needed larger numbers of medium tanks rather than small numbers of heavy tanks. He understood that armoured warfare required mobility, and mobility required reliable vehicles available in sufficient numbers to exploit breakthroughs and conduct sustained operations. Heavy tanks, regardless of individual capabilities, could never achieve the operational tempo necessary for mobile warfare. Hitler overruled these objections, insisting that superior technology would prove decisive. Soviet commanders, by contrast, accepted that individual Soviet tanks were inferior to individual German tanks in most technical specifications. They compensated through numerical superiority, simplified logistics, and operational doctrine that leveraged Soviet advantages while minimizing German ones. The IS-2, despite its slower rate of fire and less sophisticated optics, proved more valuable to Soviet operations than the Königstiger proved to German operations, because the IS-2 could reach the battlefield in sufficient numbers, with adequate fuel and ammunition, supported by effective combined arms tactics. Technical specifications mattered less than operational effectiveness. Individual tank performance mattered less than systemic military capability. The engagement at Oględów in August 1944, where Dmitri Aleksandrovich and his fellow Soviet tankers destroyed or damaged 14 Königsteigers at the cost of 10 IS-2 tanks, exemplified the fundamental dynamic of late-war armoured combat on the Eastern Front. German technical superiority, though real, could not overcome Soviet advantages in numbers, industrial capacity, and operational adaptability. The Soviets could afford to lose 10 tanks to destroy 14, because replacement vehicles would arrive within days while German losses remained permanent. Soviet crews could accept casualties, knowing reserves existed to continue operations, while German crews fought knowing that each loss brought defeat closer. The psychology of this situation affected morale profoundly. German tankers, even in superior vehicles, understood they fought a losing battle against an enemy who could absorb losses indefinitely while Germany could not. Soviet tankers, despite operating inferior equipment, maintained confidence that ultimate victory remained achievable because the industrial and numerical balance favored the Soviet Union overwhelmingly. This psychological dynamic, as much as any technical factor, determined the war's outcome. Post-war analysis by both Soviet and Western intelligence services examined the Königstiger program's cost-effectiveness and strategic value. American analysts, who captured numerous Königsteigers in Germany and subjected them to comprehensive testing, concluded that the tank represented impressive engineering achievement compromised by strategic miscalculation. The technical sophistication that made the Königstiger formidable also made it expensive, difficult to produce, and challenging to maintain. British analysts reached similar conclusions, noting that the resources invested in 492 Königsteigers might have produced 1,500 Panther medium tanks, which could have provided more tactical flexibility and operational utility. Soviet analysts focused on different aspects. They noted that Königsteigers had been destroyed or disabled by every weapon in the Soviet arsenal: 122mm tank guns, 85mm tank guns, anti-tank artillery, infantry anti-tank weapons, aerial bombs, and improvised explosives. This demonstrated that no tank, regardless of armor thickness or gun power, could survive concentrated anti-tank efforts by forces with adequate numbers and determination. The lesson Soviet designers drew from this wasn't to build heavier tanks with thicker armor. The lesson was that tanks should be designed as components of combined arms operations rather than as individually decisive weapons. This philosophy would guide Soviet tank design throughout the Cold War, producing the T-54, 55 and T-62 series that emphasized reliability, ease of production, and integration with infantry and artillery over individual vehicle superiority. The Königstiger program demonstrated conclusively what happens when a nation prioritizes technical excellence over operational practicality. Germany built a tank superior in many specifications to any opponent. But superiority in specifications doesn't win wars. Production capacity wins wars, logistics wins wars, numerical superiority wins wars. Training adequate numbers of crews wins wars. Maintaining industrial infrastructure wins wars. The Königstiger excelled at winning individual tank versus tank engagements. Germany needed to win the war. The final assessment belongs to the combat veterans who fought in these machines. German Königstiger crews, interviewed after the war, expressed pride in their vehicle's capabilities while acknowledging its limitations. They described the confidence that came from knowing their armor could withstand most enemy fire, and their gun could destroy any enemy tank at extreme range. But they also described the frustration of mechanical breakdowns at critical moments, the fear of running out of fuel with no prospect of resupply, and the helplessness of watching infantry overrun positions because supporting forces couldn't arrive in time. Soviet IS-2 crews expressed different perspectives. They acknowledged fear when facing Königsteigers, knowing German guns could kill them at ranges where return fire proved impossible. But they also described confidence in their training, trust in their tactics, and certainty that numerical superiority would ultimately prevail. They emphasized that Soviet doctrine never expected individual tanks to win battles. Coordinated operations won battles. Combined arms won battles. Overwhelming force applied at the decisive point won battles. The IS-2 existed as one tool among many, not as a war-winning wonder weapon. This fundamental difference in perspective explains why the Soviet Union won the war despite fielding tanks individually inferior to German designs. Soviet commanders understood that war is a systemic competition between entire societies, not a contest between individual weapons. The society with superior industrial capacity, larger population, better logistics, and more effective operational doctrine defeats the society with superior individual weapons, but inferior systemic capabilities. The Königstiger, despite achieving all the technical specifications its designers promised, lost the war because technical specifications don't determine strategic outcomes. Industrial capacity, numerical superiority, and operational sustainability determine strategic outcomes. Germany forgot this principle and paid the ultimate price. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.